Welcome back to the Odd Times. This is issue 5, Space. How do we go from here? Yeah. And I'm Nick.
I'm Clara. I'm Clara over here.
And I'm Tad, way over here.
Yeah. Remote.
Way out in space.
That's right. I'm in a different solar system.
Whoa.
Our
How'd you get there?
I manipulated space-time.
What?
I know. Well, we don't know how we're going to get to other solar systems yet. The current answer is it's not possible, but there are actually several things they are currently developing that may work to get us to the stars. For this, I focused on, just for fun, of course, us getting to the other stars, so manned space travel. I didn't look into any options for unmanned.
Not us, like the three of us.
Well, no. That would be cool, though. Travel time is not the only barrier to interstellar travel. We touched on this a little bit in part 1. There is a lot of radiation out there. A lot of it, I think, we still don't even know what it is. You would die, and there's no physical shielding good enough to keep that much radiation out. 0G, or what they're calling now micro G, because apparently there's always a little bit of G. The micro G environments are also really hard on your body. And there are psychological factors, depending on the length of the voyage and how you go. So we've got a lot to surmount to get to the other stars. But for today, we're going to look at travel time. Our closest neighbor is Alpha Centauri, and I looked up how long would it take us to get there, and there's a bunch of different answers that ranged everywhere from 20 years to 50,000 years.
That's a pretty big range. Jeez.
Yeah. So that was super helpful.
Yeah.
But right now it's a long way. We talked a little bit about how far away Mars was. And I can't even tell you how far away Alpha Centauri is in miles. It's 4.3 light years. Wow. So even at the speed of light, it would take you almost a decade to get there and back.
So we know from the last episode that 1 AU, the distance between the Earth and the Sun, is 93 million miles, and it takes 8 minutes for light to get here from the Sun. So
wow,
you got to imagine.
Yeah,
4 years.
That is 4 years versus 8 minutes
and 93 million miles.
Yeah, that's insane. Right? That's a long way.
Yeah.
So we're going to look, there are 2 main barriers when it comes to getting into space, and that is cost per kilogram to get out of the Earth's atmosphere, and then the quantity of fuel needed to get to a distant star and then decelerate, which actually takes more fuel, I think, than flying does.
Oh, wow.
So, because you have to decelerate with almost as much force as you needed to accelerate.
Yes.
Right.
Whereas in space, you just kind of have to nudge your course a little bit, I think, is the impression that I got. You just keep going the direction you're going. You need fuel to go where you want instead of randomly into asteroids and things.
Is it a thing like at the halfway point, you start putting on deceleration because, that's how much
I don't
fuel?
know.
Yeah.
I didn't look into that in depth because all of these methods that we're going to look at use different types of fuel, and a lot of them don't use any fuel at all.
Oh, okay.
But it may be you just need a super big deceleration in the neighboring star system.
Yeah.
Rather than having to start decelerating halfway through.
That makes sense.
But I'm not sure.
Right.
So, in brief, first I'll just list the methods we're going to look at today, just so we have a frame, and then we're just going to go through them one by one. We're going to talk about the EmDrive, solar sails, generational ships, and a closely related cryogenic ships, wormholes, and what I'm calling portal technology, which unlike wormholes, you actually have to go place the second gate before you can go through it.
Oh, okay.
We're going to look at alternate dimensions. What I'm kind of thinking of in my head is subspace, places where you go into a different dimension, kind of like the Nether in Minecraft. You go in, it's a shorter distance, you come back out.
Right.
Ion drives and warp drives, and the last one is the Ramjet, Boussard Ramjet is often how it's called. So we'll start with the EmDrive. This has been a sensation lately. This is actually the first one that caught my eye when I was looking into this topic. Not because it was a great drive, but because it would break all known laws of physics if it worked.
Yeah.
So the basic concept is it's a cylinder, like a truncated cone. It's a cylinder that's bigger on one end than the other. And they bounce microwaves into the narrow end, which then exert pressure on the sides of the cone as they vibrate down. And the person who came up with the first one in 2001 said that they had more bounce at the bigger end of the cone than the smaller end, which was a net gain in thrust. Okay, so the EmDrive is exciting because it requires no fuel at all. And the reason it's exciting also is because it seems to violate the law that every action needs to have an equal and opposite reaction. Basically, there's nothing it's thrusting against, so you should not be able to get thrust out of it.
Right.
So it had a saga. It started in 2001. This is a fairly new concept. British engineer Roger Scheuer, I believe, set up a fund to look into this, and he published some results claiming that he had measured thrust. And then in 2012, Northwestern Polytechnical University in China published a paper showing measurable thrust in their prototype. 2016, NASA got in on it, and they published their test results showing thrust had happened. Also in 2016, the China Academy of Space Technology said that they had observed thrust and were carrying out in-orbit verification. I've not heard any follow-up to that. But in 2018, and this is where I came in, I saw an article on this team from the Institute of Aerospace Engineering in Dresden, Germany. They were basically, their theory was that it might be interference. So they developed better testing sensors, which have applications outside of this. But, awesome. That was the exciting part. Is they developed these, and they concluded that the apparent thrust is clearly an artifact caused by Earth's magnetic field interacting with power cables in the chamber, a result that other experts agree with, which I'm glad of because I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
Like, in a real sense. Like, that's why I had to read it verbatim.
Yeah, it kind of, I mean, power cables carry electromagnetic fields, which if they're in close proximity to something, I mean, could interfere with a test. That kind of makes sense. It's like, you get all these EM spikes going back to our supernatural
paranormal issue, yeah.
one rather. Yeah, you get EM spikes that originate from
I'll be honest,
like electrical
if you're looking
stuff.
you're looking for great scientific explanations of these, I am not the right person. So please go look these up. The science is fascinating.
Yeah.
As part of that disclaimer, I had totally forgotten about the magnetic part of electromagnetic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, electricity and magnetism, how do they interact?
Yeah, I had
in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I had a school project once where I made a magnet with a battery or something, and like some copper wire and a bolt, and made a little crane out of it and was picking up other bolts. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that
sounds like fun.
It was like 4th grade. It was so long ago.
I don't
remember.
I don't know much about the EmDrive, but I saw a thing about the guy making the better test and them basically, I guess the organization, basically saying they measured thrust because everything is moving. Gravity, the sun, everything is moving due to gravity. Even in the universe, everything's moving away from the center of the universe, so everything technically has a little bit of thrust, and that the previous tests were all picking up that because it was such a tiny, like, amount of thrust, and so the new testing accounts for that or eliminates that as it being picked up.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
It is what I heard,
because we're moving all the time in, like you said, like 30 different directions.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Which, yes, as a perspective, the places that were registering thrust they were measuring, I think I saw around like 10 to 40 micronewtons of thrust. Now, a micronewton is a 1/1,000,000th of a newton. And for comparison, a single SpaceX Merlin engine produces around 845,000 newtons of thrust at sea level.
Yeah, so it was such a
So
tiny little
it's
amount.
microscopic.
Wow.
But the idea of an engine that provides thrust with no propulsion, no input, no fuel, that's huge. If we can ever find something like that.
Well,
Yeah.
it still needs microwaves, so it would need something to generate those, and then batteries and solar panels, right? And then you could go forever. Still constantly gaining thrust.
Exactly. So what I
Crazy.
found that it was interesting is this is not the first time this story has happened.
Really?
Really. Now we used to call what they're called reactionless drives. And before that they were called perpetual motion machines.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That is what those are. Wow.
So the first, well, I don't know about the first. The first one I saw that was famous attempt at creating reactionless drive happened around 1960. This guy named Norman Dean developed the Dean drive, which
Nice.
he was a private inventor, essentially, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And he gave demonstrations of it, but he never allowed it to be seen publicly. He never allowed independent scientists to come in and verify it. He put out a whole lot of information about it, and he got one of the big science fiction magazines at the time. The editor got really behind the Dean drive. And he said he'd witnessed it. He watched, like, they put it on a bathroom scale, and when they activated it, the weight on the scale, the measurement went down, which proved it was fighting against gravity. Like, and then something came out that discredited it, and it kind of turned into the same kind of media drama as the EmDrive.
Oh, wow.
But it ended up being discredited at the end. And then in the 80s, there was something called the gyroscopic inertial thruster made by a Scottish inventor named Sandy Kidd. And he looked into it through at the 80s, and they said didn't have any success finding. And they had a long scientific explanation as to how it was like a gyroscope, and that's why it could create internal thrust. But we've never found anything that works.
Right.
Wow.
So the next one is solar sails, which is actually way more likely. We have a lot of things in space right now that are using solar sails. Yes. They are also a fuel-less form of transportation, which has great advantage. Well, semi-fuel-less. The problem is there may not be enough sunlight between star systems for solar sails to be effective.
Right.
Especially since you also tend to use the same sensors, the same solar panels, to generate power for the vehicle. Because you're already getting sunlight on, they're already aimed at it. So you would have to store it in batteries or something to get across.
Right.
But there's also beam sailing, which I'm not sure how that works, because it seems like you'd need the power to do the beam that you sail with. So you still have a power generating source, but you can aim a laser at the solar panel instead of sunlight and do what they call beam sailing.
Yes.
Oh,
I'm familiar with that too from research. Yeah, that's a cool one. So they build a beam near a star, and they have constant power and a huge amount of output. And one thing they could do is they could actually build mirrors in the top of the star, and use it to create, because the particles are already plasma, I guess, or already excited or something. You can really easily generate really easily with huge mirrors made of materials that don't exist yet. You can create a laser that will go or just a really hugely powerful laser. And the problem with that long term, if I remember correctly, was it would have an issue because lasers kind of spread apart over distance, there would be a smaller amount of power as you went out. But
makes sense.
that was
And this is a problem with casual research because I totally missed the possibility that the laser beam would not be on the ship itself, creating a closed loop.
Well, there could be another one though, where actually a laser ship could shoot a laser around a high gravitational astral body like a black hole and hit itself and slow itself down.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Because the looping
the light
around
has
the
to be behind
hole,
it.
And while looping around the black hole, it would be a higher energy laser than the ship was shooting out. So
that's true.
Potentially.
You'd
So
have
that was a cool one.
That's cool. That would be a very specific set of circumstances. Like, you need to go a specific direction. There has to be a black hole right there next to an appropriate sun to make the laser and do the thing.
There's a YouTuber that has done a few videos on that named Isaac Arthur.
Oh,
really
great.
Cool futurist.
Very great.
And like his videos take place over millennia, over like millions of years in the future when we can basically materially do anything we want.
Yeah,
like this is a physically possible way to get that done, and it's just a series of really cool videos, especially if you're a writer and you're looking to do something spacey, like just interesting stuff.
Link in the description, right?
Yeah, totally, of course.
Shout out.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I want people to see those videos too, because it's like they're really cool.
Yeah.
But
so solar sails show up everywhere all the time in fiction. That's just, it's a common one in the more realistic SF. And it's also in reality. Like I said, I noticed 3 notable ones. One is Icaros, which was launched in 2010. The first practical solar sail vehicle. And as of 2015, it was still under thrust, which 5 years shows that it will work for longer missions.
Yeah.
The other super fascinating one is called Breakthrough Starshot. This is one, it's a cool name.
Yeah.
This may be the one that's being crowdfunded. But that could also be light sail. But Breakthrough Starshot, what they want to do is get to Alpha Centauri. And what they're trying to do is make a fleet of thousands of nano probes, essentially, each equipped with a light sail and propelled by a beam from Earth.
Oh.
And they would get up to, I think, 20% of light speed.
Oh, wow.
I don't have the stats right in front of me, but fast enough that they could get to Alpha Centauri in 20 years.
Wow.
And take about 5 years worth of pictures. And I'm not sure how they're sending them back. We'd have to wait 4 years for the information, but how do we even send it over that far of space? I didn't look into that. Like, how do we transmit a photo? It's not like using your phone.
Radio waves? Can you do that with phone?
Maybe
they at the end of the journey form a very large transmitter out of nanoprobes. I don't know. It's like
just like suddenly become like a
transformer turns into a radio antenna or like a big flashlight and just starts like beaming
big satellite
absolutely
dish
back to us. No, that's not nanoprobes though.
Nanoprobes. So Breakthrough Starshot, that's worth looking at if you're interested. The other interesting one was Light Sail, which I need to look up again. This may be the one that's literally launching like the day we film this.
Oh, wow.
And it is this the one? I think it was put out by the Planetary Society.
Oh, cool. Yeah, they do good work.
And
Planetary.
as of right this second, they are scheduled for launch in 2 days, 2 hours, and 54 minutes. It is a crowdfunded solar sail project.
Crazy.
So I think it's pretty amazing that just ordinary people can start to crowdfund things like space exploration.
It is. A lot of private companies like SpaceX and stuff are really kind of leading the way on some things. So people are taking it into their own hands.
It's very nice to see. Yeah.
It is. It is.
Especially...
So we're going to take a break from some of the more realistic, hard sciencey type ones, and we're going to talk about one that's on the borderline, which is the generational ship. Not try to change our technology for thrust, but
Right.
trying to change our technology of how we interact with space. This really comes down to what we talked about in part 1, which is the problem of reproduction.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Not to mention radiation and magnetic fields and all the other hazards of traveling through space.
So the generational ships are basically a ship that just kind of goes at a regular speed, and then the people on the ship have children, and then those children grow up and continue the mission until eventually
Right.
we're there and back again 5-6 generations later, essentially.
Which,
yes.
you know, most of the times I've run into the concept of the generational ship, it's kind of been one way. And I think that's why.
That makes
Like,
sense,
you
yeah.
often see them in context of colonization, because you
Right.
need to transport a vast number of people and a vast amount of resources a very long way, one direction.
Right.
Um,
You have to be completely self-sustaining, and
mhm.
you would have to have a method of travel that didn't involve fuel to a large degree. You know,
Or
unless
a
it
big
could,
enough ship that it could carry enough fuel, or way to
Yeah.
refuel in space.
or yeah, maybe it would have harvesting means available for like getting fuel off of planets and stars or whatever.
Mhm.
You know, it would depend a lot on the level of technology, so I guess that's not really a hurdle. But yeah, the whole like living out in space for that long and going stir crazy in space, and I mean, it would have to
Mhm.
be like a complete microbiome
Oh,
Yeah.
You know.
certainly.
in every way.
It would have to be vast.
Yeah.
Mhm. Especially if
Absolutely
you're
vast.
especially if you're going to colonize, just getting the amount of biodiversity that you would need to, you know, support a healthy population. You'd either need a lot of people, or say you had like frozen embryos,
Ooh.
and then you wouldn't need as many people. Just every female in the new colony would just totally genetically different children.
That's true. Because I did a little research on
Throwing it
minimum
out there.
population for genetic diversity for a different project.
Mm.
And if everyone is young and single and totally unrelated to each other, which you would probably have in a colonization mission, honestly.
Yeah.
I think the minimum was, I think, around 200 people.
That's less than I expected it would be.
Yes. Now, if you have family groups or more age diverse people, where not everyone is just entering prime reproductive years, that number has to go up, often significantly.
Right.
Because the other thing about colonization missions is you need experts, and they are rarely young,
25.
healthy 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not how all the movies go.
But yeah, they're all young,
Yeah.
beautiful 20-year-old
Yeah.
science
Well, yes.
geniuses.
Lately, they're all teenagers. But
Really?
I mean,
Yeah.
that's in the movies. I guess that's not.
Well,
I don't
speaking
know.
of things that aren't real,
Huh.
which half this list is, the next one is closely related to generational ships, because it would probably need the same sort of transportational technology, like the same method of shielding and thrust and all that. And that's cryogenics, where instead of 200 people board the ship and however many years later their ancestors, their descendants come off, it's you enter the ship, you get put in cold storage, and you're woken up X many number of years later.
Right.
There
I
are
mean-
still people choosing to be frozen now, but as far as I know, we can't unfreeze them.
No.
Yeah. I mean,
And they're very dead.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's true.
Like-
But if we
Yeah.
ever do happen upon, like, a lot of people are of the opinion that it's not going to be too long before we start, you know, merging our consciousness with machines.
Oh, like a digital backup of
Yeah,
your...
and granted, who knows if there will be an interface that can ever copy a dead person's, you know,
Yeah.
brain in a way that can reproduce their
Right.
consciousness. But you know, we could I know there are interfaces that connect electronic components directly to the human brain. Like there have been
Mhm.
cameras that have been used by blind people to see and that kind of thing.
They still have, I believe, they still have remote controlled rats for search and rescue.
Oh, trippy.
Yeah. I've seen cockroaches.
Mm.
And so
I heard that they did use some rats they trained for search and rescue because they needed the ability to smell
that's crazy.
or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have like limbs and stuff, so they can connect to your brain, so you can
Right.
like move the fingers of your.
And you can get feedback on hot and cold and that kind of thing. I think touch.
Maybe one day.
Maybe. I mean, we're not that far. We know where to stimulate to create certain feelings.
That'd be an interesting like new take on the cryogenics thing. Instead of freezing your body, you back up your brain.
Yeah, and
then download into a new.
Not implausible, and
body.
especially if we are
I
exist
mean,
as
maybe more plausible than cryogenics.
It may be.
Yeah.
well, who knows? But
Altered Carbon by Netflix covered that topic.
that's a really good.
And
series.
apparently it's a book. It was a book first.
Oh.
Philip K. Dick, maybe.
Go figure.
Yes.
It would sound like something he would write.
It does.
Very Philip K.
And I have a
Dickian.
friend who's reading the book right now, and he says he loved the series. He loves the book. They are a little different, but equally good.
Nice.
So
That's a good recommendation.
High praise.
Yeah, the Netflix series was really good. It was well acted. The shots were amazing, and the script was really good. And it came out right around the same time as Blade Runner 2049. So it was kind of like
Lots of good sci-fi.
yeah, it was great. It was a great time. Great time in my life. But yeah, so I mean, if we exist as programs, we can write new ways of interacting with the world that could take less time, or we could take a lot less matter to have a fulfilling experience of the world. We could put ourselves in cold storage like the Borg, and just sit there as like robot people in a little storage slot, download into a mainframe and just exist there. I mean,
in the I think it was a sci-fi series, meaning the channel Sci-Fi, Dark Matter. They had an interesting concept that used that, which was clone transit.
Yes.
You got in a bin and it tested your genetic material and built a clone on the other end. It transferred your consciousness into the clone's consciousness, and you were in the new place for a duration. And then if you got killed, all your memories since the transfer were lost.
Yeah.
But if you went back and transferred back, you would re-download those memories and assimilate them again.
nice.
So trippy.
Yeah.
That's how most people traveled in that universe for short trips.
It's weird to me, like, considering that, because I grew up on Star Trek and they had the teleporter, and I'm thinking anything where your normal consciousness is like copied and then reproduced on the other end after you're broken down, I would think that breaking down kind of interrupts your normal consciousness.
You'd think, yeah.
And then you happen to get assembled on the other side, this different person with a sort of contiguous experience of the whole situation, but this new person nonetheless that's having a new experience because your old one just ended when you stepped in the teleporter and got murdered.
Yeah.
Was it Barclay in the Next Gen that was very afraid of teleporters and didn't want to go in them for that reason?
Yeah.
He was very against it.
Yeah.
Did they ever address whether
Reginald
that was
Barclay.
true?
No,
they kind of did.
Well,
actually.
he had a whole different thing. Like there were entities in the teleportation field.
Yeah.
But I don't think they really...
They sort of implicitly did it, because in that episode, they have a visualization of being in a teleporter. And what it is you see light, and you exist as your own physical body in this sort of light environment where you just kind of are and nothing else is. And that's how your consciousness is maintained, I guess, because that for him was a consistent experience between the 2 points. So they tried to model it. But I think that was more for the sake of the narrative than the philosophical question of whether or not that was the same Barclay. But that also raises the question, could you build a sort of thing to keep consciousness like stable and then impose it on something on the other end, which we don't even know what consciousness is. So that's
I was about to say that. I'm like,
yeah,
we can't answer that question because we can answer the question as clearly no, we cannot.
Right.
Because we don't even.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, we do not currently still have the processing power, at least not all in one program, to completely model the human brain, all the neurons that we know about and what they do. We literally do not have a computer that can handle that, is what I heard.
That's what I've heard as well, and can't back up, but that is what I've heard.
Yeah. Actually, like the closest I've heard to anyone coming up with, I guess you'd say, a true AI was a guy who spoke in my psychology class at UW, who was working on a computer model of the human consciousness for psychological research in the psychology department, not a computer department. But they're trying to come up with a realistic model of the human brain or the human mind. And I think they said they've gotten it. It's nowhere near 100%. I don't remember what percentage of the brain they've managed to build a replica of, but it's nowhere near 100.
I believe that, yeah.
That would be so weird.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you got to wonder if they get really good at building that model, if that is actually a human mind in there.
Right?
And
yeah,
why is
how do we
not...
define humanity?
Well, yeah,
it's a very
and
philosophical question.
Okay, so we all have senses, but we exist outside of that. But what happens to a human mind when it has no input? Would you then be studying
I would say
that?
insanity.
Well, yeah, you would think. So is that ever going to be a reasonable approximation of a human mind if you don't give it some eyes, ears, an ability to communicate? It's just going to be like a raving lunatic.
Yeah. Well, no, that's unfair.
Probably.
Because now it's not the same, because she still had her chemical and tactile senses, but Helen Keller was raised without what we think of as really critical input for humans, which is sight and sound.
Yeah.
And I use her as a specific example. I know there were others, but thankfully today most people have methods of communication, whether they're blind or deaf or both. But she wasn't introduced to language particularly until she was how old? Like they used to tie her to a chair.
Yeah.
And
older. I want to say like preteen, but I'm not sure.
That's kind of what I'm thinking, is late childhood, preteen era time period. But yeah, so clearly she was not a raving lunatic.
No.
Though she was an exceptional human being.
It's true.
And a robot in a box that's been, I don't know, there is some kind of
differences.
Yeah, it's not a full 1-to-1, but yeah, that's a good point. And I would be interested in knowing, but also like the implications of that research make me wonder if it's kind of already going too far, just because, but we have to know what it's like. But is it actually feeling and thinking?
Well, but is it just a model, or is it an actual? If it's just a program model, then it's not. It's nothing. It's a map.
Are you sure? Because if it's a program model and it's accurate,
I think it was supposed to be a programmed working model, not like a visual model but like the given the right input,
stimulus.
It would respond like a human mind.
Right. So it gets input. So that's a good thing. My question is, what kind of input? Like, literally, what do they hook it up to?
I'm sure.
Well, they're not done,
sure running
so they probably don't even
kind.
know.
Yeah, probably. They're just sitting there typing into a computer, but like, what would happen if you gave it some visual?
So
also, your
whether
camera...
we're talking about duplicating consciousness or physically freezing the body, you're going to run into the same problem with this method of travel, which is time dilation. If you can get close to light speed, you might be able to start doing round trips. But what was 2 years for you might be 100 years on Earth.
Right. So.
That's just a possible pro or con for the cryogenic / consciousness transfer, assuming we can't beam consciousness, that it has to be physically taken somewhere.
Right. Your camera moved.
It did, because I had to plug in my phone.
I just wanted to let you know.
I mean, we would need some kind of just an exploration of the idea of beaming consciousness to a place to even colonize it. we would need to have some kind of physical matter go there first.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely, that's true.
Because otherwise we would never have a tool to start building with, or a body to land in.
Right.
So that would probably have to be something very small and like style tech with,
Right.
very low.
Or
It just
the colony ship may have the raw materials it needs to build new bodies on the other end.
oh, that's right.
That would make
Yeah.
most sense.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one has a similar problem, which is portal technology. Actually, literally what we were just talking about with this one. Portal technology, the way I'm envisioning it for this discussion, is man-made portals that link to each other that have to be built by man. So you would first have to send a ship out to build a portal on the other end before you could use the portals. And usually when it's in fiction, once the portals are both built, it's essentially instantaneous travel.
Right.
Or often for mass numbers of people, depending on the portal. We don't know how it works. It's totally theoretical. So kind of just keep that concept in mind for later when we vote.
It would be nice if we could use something like that, because then we wouldn't suffer any kind of time dilation, and therefore we'd be doing it for people we knew instead of like the children of the children of the children of the children of the people we knew, if they are still alive, which we very much hope so, but aren't quite sure of because we're so far out that there's no way to know.
Well, depending, we wouldn't be doing it for people we know, because you'd have to have people travel that distance to build it and theoretically never come back. So by the time they got there and built it, it still would probably be the next generation that was using it.
Maybe operating it. Anyway,
just some like 90-year-old man, like, I designed this. Like, yeah.
No, I know what it is. It's like Ender's Game. They send children on the original ship. And raise them to be the engineers and mechanics and people that they will need.
Yeah.
And then when they build the gate on the other end, they've made it into like their 20s, and then they connect back to Earth, and
they just come back.
People their age are like 80, so they overlap a little bit.
Oh, weird. That'd be weird.
That would be really weird.
Well, now, I mean, if we use some of the previously mentioned methods that would get us up to near light speed or get our nanobots up to near light speed or anything like that, like it would take so long for any signals to get back to us, and it would take so long for those like they'd still be traveling huge distances, even if it only seemed like it was 4 hours to them or whatever, however long, 20 days.
Weird would it be, like, you send a team to go build the other... Yeah. Well, how weird would it be, like, you send someone to go make another end of a portal, and then you'd have it built on Earth probably before they got where they were going. So then you're just like, now we wait. And then, like, however many, like, decades later, you're just waiting at the portal to see if it goes.
To see if they made it.
Yeah, and then you wouldn't know. You, in theory, wouldn't know until that portal went on or didn't.
I heard.
Yeah. But, Nick, you brought up something that I hadn't thought of before, because the last time I was really reading fiction that dealt with portal technology like these kinds of problems, was like a couple decades ago. But you wouldn't need to send people anymore with the way technology's developed for us. You could send a fleet of nanobots pre-programmed to build a modular thing you've already designed.
We're not too far from that, maybe, for sure.
No.
Yeah. I mean, if we're doing that Starshot thing where we're powering them with a laser and they have a sail and they're going and they can do it, assuming we ever get to the technology level where nanobots can break things down atomically and reassemble them, then we can do a lot more, because we can have those self-replicate if they don't get out of control and turn things into sludge.
Yeah, self-replicating is never... just goes bad places.
Some level of that has to happen for it to work. No. Unless they are going to Mechazord it, or become.
I would hope they would.
Like a bigger thing that then has better operational power, which would kind of make sense too. But we'd still need to be sending a lot of them en masse to get that done without any kind of self-replication. But
yeah,
I mean, yeah.
But I think we're a lot closer to building things with nanobots than we are to figuring out how to send organic humans through space without dying.
I think you're probably right about that.
And in a way, it's super cool, and in a way, it's really sad it's very likely that the human exploration of space won't actually be done by us physically. I don't know, something about that seems very dissatisfying to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it won't be us; it'll be essentially a different race of things that we've created to do it by proxy. Like, something about that is both cool and a little sad.
Yeah. Also, it sounds like the beginning of at least 3 awesome novels.
Right?
Very, very different awesome novels, but all of them awesome.
You're welcome.
I actually heard an interesting theory about wormholes that if you were to take...
Okay, good.
Well, wait, because that's one of them.
Or gates. Like...
Oh, okay, because our next topic is... The next method is wormholes. So if this deals with both, that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of similar concepts, right? Like a gate is just a wormhole you can open and close.
Yeah, artificial.
Like a sphincter at either end, you know?
Maybe a different analogy.
Sure. Whatever works.
A door?
At any rate, like if you took the end of one of those gates and they were both open and you had it contained and, say you took it and accelerated to the speed of light, that could allow for time travel once you get it to the other end, because you would be sending anything back into God, my brain just broke trying to understand this.
If you were moving at the speed of light, you wouldn't be aging at the rate you were moving. So if you go like 10 light years, you haven't aged 10 years.
Correct.
Right.
So you'd essentially be moving backwards in time, or you'd be moving forwards in time because you wouldn't be aging at the same rate that everything around you was. Yes.
Well, I will be honest with you. I've watched like an entire professional video representation of how relativity and Einsteinian space work, and I did not understand a single syllable of it.
Oh, yeah.
It depends on where you're standing. And also parts of it, I think, are still unsolved or unfinished. Right. And it gets weird. Weird, I do not understand any of it.
And a lot of it's theoretical and maybe not the truth. And there's some of it that is the best we know. And it all looks like the best we know.
Right.
Because otherwise it's not really widely accepted scientific theory. It doesn't plug in.
Such as wormholes.
Such as wormholes. Thank you, Clara. Okay, so for me, how I differentiated between them for this thing was portals are man-made.
Yeah.
Wormholes are an actual theoretical artifact of space-time as we currently understand it. The concept is that somehow space-time folds over on itself like this, kind of like an O'Neill cylinder, and then it can like touch briefly. And create a direct path between these two areas. Problem 1, they're theoretical. They make sense with our current mathematical understanding of the universe, but we've never seen one.
Right.
Problem 2, and this part I was unaware of, is that, you see it in science fiction. Wormholes are not stable. But what that actually means is mathematically, if wormholes exist, they only open for milliseconds at most. So you literally could not go through.
Right.
Without. Okay, so.
Chopped in half.
Yeah.
That would be
a science fiction. It would. The science fiction universe that used wormholes was Stargate.
Right.
So that was not what I'm calling portal technology for this particular discussion, because they actually use natural wormholes, and I'd never known that. And I read this fascinating discussion of how it worked. Apparently, they did think about the science, and it had like 3 filters in front of it. One converted you into basically a light signal, and one shielded you from radiation, and then one shot you through the wormhole in like the millisecond that it was open.
Oh, wow.
And then one reconstituted you on the other side. Like, it was a whole thing, which I never knew Stargate was that
I
complex.
didn't.
I thought they were just magical gates.
Yeah, I thought they were just magical
there was
stargates.
implication that people would move around in the gate. You know, it would the camera would move, and it was exciting.
Weird.
Well, according
possibly significant.
Ew.
Stargate.
So the last truly theoretical method to talk about is, I'm calling it subspace. It's not really. Usually when you run into the term subspace, they're talking about it takes time to travel, but communication is instantaneous. And you'll run into that quite a bit in science fiction worlds.
Right.
And usually that is what they're talking about when they say subspace. But an alternate dimension. This is, like I was saying earlier, it's like the Nether. It is a parallel world in which distance is shorter. One of the best examples I've ever run into of this, one of my personal favorites, is a book called This Alien Shore by C.S. Friedman. I will put a link in the description. Her world is fascinating from the point of view of this discussion. They invented something called the Hausman drive that allowed interstellar faster than light travel. And they sent billions of people out to colonize thousands of worlds. And only after they did that did they discover that the Hausman drive caused massive genetic mutation.
Oh, wow.
Oops.
So you have thousands of Earth colonies all over the world, and most of them are not even recognizable as human anymore. The mutations, some people died, like whole ships, of course. But some of them were changed. Like you had people that they look like giant spiders, or they had magic in a way that we don't, or any number of things, infinite mutations.
That sounds
so
awesome.
Earth panicked. This is all backstory.
Yeah.
Earth panics because, oh my God, these people aren't really human, and also we need to not send any more people out. So they cancel outgoing missions. They cut off all contact with the colonies because the only way to travel that far is the Hausman drive, which you can't do without causing massive genetic mutation. So all these brand new settlements, some of them hadn't even made it to their planet yet when this happened. Very few of them were settled and cut off completely from Earth. No resupplies, no information, no cultural exchange, nothing.
Wow.
This lasted for several hundred years, I think, at least. And then one of the colonies invented a new way to travel faster than light and started reconnecting everybody.
Wow. That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
it is. So the culture that could do this, their genetic mutation was essentially mental. They looked human. But every one of that species, we'll say, was born with an extreme form of what we now would consider a mental illness. Something like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or the physiological / chemical ones, essentially. And one of those mutations was essentially multiple personality disorder. The way they traveled faster than light is they discovered another dimension in which travel was a lot faster, but this was a nightmare dimension. No one could be exposed to it for more than a second without going irrevocably insane. And I know that's not how you say that word.
Why is there always a price?
Irrevocably.
Right? But because they had these people who were naturally dissociative, they would naturally splinter into multiple personalities. There was one personality that most people had it was like the terrified child personality. And most people with dissociative disorder, that's the one they're trying to protect in a lot of ways. But that one, because they were always raving insane, could handle the subspace, let me see what she called it.
That's so funny. They were already gone. So
yeah, they're already insane. Maybe it drove them sane.
And the story opens with a girl that the humans have been experimenting on to try and see if they can make her crazy in the right way, that they can break the monopoly on interstellar travel.
Oh, wow. That sounds great. I may have to read that because that sounds awesome.
I love C.S. Friedman's books in general, and this is one of my favorite depictions of the universe. It's fascinating. So I had to include this type of travel, even though it's so broad, we can't really talk about it because of that example specifically.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Is always a price to that sort of thing. Usually only a couple people can do it or whatever. Like in this one, everyone else but the pilot has to be put to sleep. And the rest of the universe thinks that's just to protect these people's proprietary method of space travel, but it's really to protect their sanity because everyone will go. There's like monsters out there that try and eat your ship. Like 30% never make it through the other side.
Oh, seems like a risky way to travel considering, but I guess if there's no better way. That what you were talking about with what was the author's name?
C.S. Friedman?
C.S. Friedman.
Those books reminded, or the method of interstellar travel actually reminded me of Robert Jordan. If you remember the Wheel of Time series, that
I read that, but I don't think I read all of it. It was still coming out at the time.
Yeah, there were these objects called waygates that were similar to stargates, but they led to another dimension where people could travel between this weird path in this other dimension, come out at another gate hundreds and hundreds of miles away in span of an hour or two. And
so nether gates then.
Basically nether gates.
Cool.
Yeah, and
cool.
It was a complicated thing in that lore because they were tainted for some story reason and couldn't be used because you would go completely insane, and I think probably die. Like I think there was something in there that would make you crazy and then kill you.
Yeah.
Like a dust.
Yeah, that's not super helpful when you want to get somewhere.
No, you tend to want to run.
Especially if you need like scientists and engineers and stuff on the other side. If half of them are crazy, then you're kind of screwed.
I mean, they might build some interesting shit at that point.
That's true.
Oh, this is to call in the Chaos God Korn, and we'll take it to the Space Marines, and we'll do all that kind of stuff.
Finally.
Yes, because we're crazy as fuck.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
It's okay.
All right.
Okay, so we're gonna swing back towards the sciencey end of stuff here instead of the made up end of stuff. With something that's kind of on the border. It's called the Boussard Ramjet. This is sciencey enough that it's hard to explain, but basically how it works is you got a giant scoop on the front that farms hydrogen atoms. And those hydrogen atoms are then funneled into essentially, I think, a nuclear reaction at the back that then propels you forward.
Oh.
So fascinating, but there are a couple problems. One is 1 to 2 hydrogen molecules per cubic meter of space. Not a lot of hydrogen.
You already have to be going super, super fast for it to work.
Well, you just need a huge area. Like the thing you would have to build as the scoop would be literally bigger than anything we can produce on Earth.
Oh, well, yeah.
In fact, I'm not sure if I'm remembering this correctly, but it may have even said that it would require more resources than we have on Earth.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
But there was a variation. The other problem is radiation. Like you're detonating hydrogen bombs at your butt, basically.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, that seems dangerous.
So the thing that makes the ramjet possibly eventually plausible is the concept of using, instead of physical things to do this, force fields, essentially.
Right.
Because there is no physical shielding that could possibly protect the people on this from the atomic explosions that are happening. Like, there isn't anything thick enough, and if there were, it sure as hell couldn't fly.
Right.
But like you were saying about the Earth's magnetosphere, if they generate a magnetosphere around the ramjet, around the ship, that will deflect the radiation. And you end up, I saw an artist's rendition, and it's just gorgeous. You end up with, forget what they were saying they could use for the scoop, but they wouldn't have to build a physical one. It would be an energy scoop, essentially. So it would cover thousands of miles.
Wow.
Without the ship having to be thousands of miles wide.
Right.
And then it would use that to create these huge loops of magnetism that would move those hydrogen atoms to the back where they're being exploded, and then move the harmful ions from that away from the ship in these long streams of interstellar wind and energy fields and stuff. So you'd have this tiny, I mean, relatively speaking, tiny little ship moving across space, surrounded by thousands of miles of energy fields that are working on gathering things from space and turning them into fuel.
That's crazy.
And
I'm picturing like a giant, like Aurora Borealis type of situation around like this little ship.
I mean, you'd get nuclear reactions behind it, so those would be like forming instantaneously and dissipating, and it would, I mean, you would see a giant rocket cone for sure, or something resembling that.
That'd be cool.
Depending on how big the aperture was. I mean, I would think maybe it would be smaller, or I don't know. That's so crazy. How big would it have to be to take advantage of, you know, an explosion like that? And I mean, I know as it got faster, it would produce explosions faster, right? Because more hydrogen would be hitting the thing and going into the back. And how would you even... I feel like for an idea like that, you almost need to have artificial gravity first, because otherwise you're going to get squished the second that first explosion goes off.
Maybe.
You're going to be against the back wall of that thing, just puddle.
So the article that I ran into this concept on has a bit of an excerpt from a novel, How Zero, which explains how the Boussard Ramjet works.
And
it's way too long to read here, but it has a little bit that I like because it kind of shows the poetry of how awesome this idea is. Because the ship was not small, yet she was the barest glint of metal in that vast web of forces which surrounded her. She herself no longer generated them. She had initiated the process when she attained minimum ramjet speed, but it became too huge, too swift, until it could only be created and sustained by itself. That sounds like a crazy thing to write across space.
I've read that book. It's a really great book with kind of a... I mean, there's only one place it can go, basically, from the jump. And if you're a physicist, you already know what that is. But I wasn't. I had no idea. I'm still not, and I couldn't explain why it went there, except it did, and it was a good ride. Very crazy. It's all like it kind of I would say its biggest thing is humanizing relativity and putting an observer there that you can relate to
that would be helpful
in the context of relativity. So it's really interesting. A very good read. Paul Anderson.
Excellent.
How Zero. Link in the description. Review. Anyway. No, I didn't remember anything about the type of engine they used or anything, but that's really fascinating. Yeah.
Okay, so I saved two for last. One is from Star Trek and one is from Star Wars.
Woo!
Okay,
Stars.
So first one, the ion drive. This is currently being tested and used right now. This is one that I needed to do more research on just because I can't really explain the science very well.
Okay.
But what you're doing essentially is creating a plasma at the back of the ship. That is, you use a noble gas to create a ion plasma that generates thrust. This was used in Star Wars apparently for slower than light travel. I think it was one of the fighters, the TIE fighters, or the other ones. I am actually a Star Wars fan. I'm just terrible at the terminology. But they mention ion thrusters there. I believe it said that there's one now that has been running continuously on Earth for over 5 years.
Wow.
It's the first to have lasted that long, and that was kind of their benchmark. I think they're starting to talk about putting it tests out in space. There are also tiny, tiny amounts of thrust. Like an ion thruster on Earth does nothing. An ion drive, basically. But once you're out in space, it allows you to do micro adjustments and things, kind of like the EmDrive would,
Right.
essentially.
Nice.
It's not faster than light, but it allows travel over long distances because it can generate its. You don't have to carry a bunch of rocket fuel.
Right. Just lightweight gas.
Exactly.
So
and it's this one's nice because it's relatively harmless. Like, unlike, for example, having a nuclear reactor on board.
Yeah.
If you have a xenon leak, no one cares.
That could be fun.
Okay.
Ride the nukes.
Helium leak.
Woo! Dr. Strangelove.
So
everybody knows there's a problem because they put helium in it, so everybody's voice goes really high.
Right.
So Tau Zero is Dr. Strangelove in space. I'm sorry, but go ahead.
So an ion drive might potentially be something good to combine with something like a cryogenics thing or a generational ship where you don't necessarily need super fast travel, but having to not worry about getting more fuel along the way would be handy kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. That or the solar sails or for unmanned things.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense too.
And then our final item is the warp drive from Star Trek. Now, this is crazy for two reasons. One, because I do not understand at all how it works. So, basically, you use negative particles to create a ripple in space-time that pushes time out in front of you and descends it behind you so that you can ride that wave like a surfboard, going significantly faster than the speed of light. But time inside the bubble where you are does not go faster than the speed of light, so you don't run into time dilation issues.
Correct.
So that's kind of crazy just from a theory perspective, but the craziest thing is they are actively investigating this, and I think it may be possible.
Yeah. There was a guy, what was his name? Alcubierre?
Oh, yes, Alcubierre is the guy. He is, I don't know much about him, but I know he is a physicist from Mexico who came up with the designs for this.
Apparently, I happened to watch an interview with him not too long ago, and he, during his graduate years at whatever school, started developing the idea of physically backing the idea of a warp drive and how it might work and what would have to happen for it to be true, basically, and got one of his professors in on it, and who he thought was going to laugh about it, and basically his professor went like, no, you should keep going with that, that's pretty interesting. And yeah, so basically the idea is, and there's another, in addition to Star Trek, it's also in Mass Effect, and that's how the video game Mass Effect, that is like part of what powers their movement through space. They have gates that somehow do it, but they also have Mass Effect engines on ships that do the same thing, and yeah, they create like really strong gravity at the, or sort of make space-time smaller in front and then make space-time larger in back. And so the space-time being smaller in front draws the ship forward, and the space-time being larger in back pushes the ship along.
But the space-time at the ship is not distorted, so it proceeds normally.
Right, because they've designed the ship with fields that, are large enough to encompass the ship, that are doing all this. The energy thing, though, that the energy requirement for even bending space-time a little bit is so extreme that it's not anything that is going to be possible for us at our current technology level.
Well, I'm not sure on that, because what I was reading about, and I don't have the details right in front of me, is apparently the design people are looking at now relies on an interaction between normal particles, and it's not dark matter, but it's similar. It is a type of
antiparticles.
Same matter? Same thing?
There's
maybe
there's theoretical particles, and this is something I learned in the past few weeks, that appear and disappear in space and in empty space at any time. And I don't know what that means, but that's probably like
and it could be antimatter, though I think we've actually found antimatter now, haven't we? Do we have direct evidentiary support of antimatter yet?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I don't think we do, but I don't. It's possible that we do. I have no idea. Go ahead.
It's interesting. So I've heard a lot about time essentially being the fourth dimension, and comparisons to, if you're familiar with the concept of flatland at all, two-dimensional people.
Maybe. Oh yeah, little bit, very little bit.
So yeah, it's essentially a people that live on a two-dimensional plane. They're no three-dimension at all. So if you say you had a balloon and it was passing through flatland, they wouldn't see it as a balloon. It would just be essentially like a line or a circle that would get bigger and then smaller before it disappeared. And essentially time is our fourth dimension because we only see it in the little sliver slices. As opposed to seeing the whole balloon, we're just seeing the little line get bigger and smaller. And so it's interesting that something like the warp drive would essentially be utilizing time as the fourth dimension to move us through a plane in a way that we can't currently conceive of.
Right.
So that's really fascinating that
it is.
If we could get that to work even a little bit, that would essentially prove that time is the fourth dimension, and that would be us essentially like stepping up a dimension in some way. Yeah. And that's like mind-blowing. That's super cool.
That is mind-blowing. Yeah. I read an article, this is a little off topic, but I read an article back in the 90s, shortly after I got out of high school, in which like theoretical string physicists or something, like, I don't even know who they were. Scientists so badass, I wasn't even sure what they studied, essentially. Had come up with some sort of proof that there were not 4 dimensions, but actually thousands of dimensions. And we can only perceive the first 3.5 of them, essentially.
I believe that.
But they had it wasn't just like somebody talking and saying, this makes sense. Like they actually had some sort of peer-reviewed evidence for this. Which makes you wonder, if we can only half understand the concept of time, what else could there possibly be beyond that?
Yeah. Well, and there's all these things that we've been able to figure out exist since we stopped relying so much on our abilities that we're born with, you know, our eyes and our senses, like microwaves and different types of light and different types of radiation. And I mean, those by themselves, from our perspective, could appear to be other dimensions. Like they have the same characteristics as a dimension we don't interact with unless it's pertinent to us. So it's like,
why is it that when they're pertinent they always kill us?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just because we're not designed for them, I think, or we're not. Well, maybe that's the wrong terminology because you know what it implies. But we didn't evolve with them, and we didn't, you know,
we're not evolved to handle them.
Yeah, we can't handle them. We don't exist there, and they exclude us, and that's why we didn't evolve with them.
Like
because we're naturally excluded by them.
Like X-rays or infrared. We know it's real. We know it does things. We know it can kind of affect us, but we don't really see it and or also feel it or
but it can still kill us.
And
because that's how life is a fragile thing. There is a reason that there is not more life in the universe. It's dangerous as crap out there.
Infrared is kind of weird too because we exude it. So you know, because of our heat radiation, and like the entire universe wants to kill us. So that's step one of the space process, acknowledging that space is a problem.
That's what I think when people are like, oh, well, we should live on Mars. We should live on Europa. I'm like, there's a reason nothing lives on Mars and Europa. It's deadly.
That's true.
Deadly space.
I mean, if there's miles of ice, but it's not water ice on Europa, is it?
Not sure.
If it's water ice, I mean, we might be able to get far enough down to put a heater and it won't.
Throw a heater on that moon.
Yes.
So is that all the...
Physicists, look them up.
That is all 10.
That's a nice, interesting spread of things there.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we've covered all 10 methods of possible interstellar travel. I'm going to do some magic and come back with a rocket game.